I'm Charlie Collins, and I do oral history interviews. And today we're going to do an interview of you and your lifetime, and more especially the times that you spent in the service. Gelmer, what is your full name?
My full name is Gelmer Willis Romeyn.
And what year and date were you born?
I was born March 24, 1923,
And where were you born, Gelmer?
Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Any particular schools that you went to as a young man, grade schools and so on? About that.
I started school on the Indian reservation in New Mexico, actually. When I was 2 years old, my parents moved down to Zuni, New Mexico. And when I became of age to go to school, they sent me to this mission school, but I was outnumbered like General Custer. And I didn't last very long in that school, so then they sent me to a public school, one-room schoolhouse in Zuni, and that wasn't too hot either. The teacher was there for health reasons, so she wasn't really a sweetheart either.
What do you remember about that one-room school?
Well, the first day was disastrous. I didn't feel at home there. In those days, they didn't welcome children. They didn't have a nice welcoming committee. She pointed out the switch she had in the corner, and I've often told this story that she also had a shotgun there. But again, you know, sometimes fact and fiction. And the story was that she had that shotgun for any of the kids that brought their horses on the schoolyard. But I figured I have to get out of here. So I when the opportunity arose, I got up and ran out. And she sent an 8th grader after me, and there's no contest there. So they brought me back in the schoolhouse, and the kid behind me lifted the seat up. So when I sat down on the floor, so that first day was not very, very pleasant.
Did you begin to enjoy the school, or did they give you a hard time all the time you was there?
Well, no, after a while I got used to it, and I don't remember all that much of it. I know that we had to take an old truck to school, and I can remember I had to walk quite a ways to get to that truck. And one time, as I recall, there was a dead coyote in the road, and I thought, man, this is nice for my mom. She can make a coat or something. It had maggots in it already. But
Okay. You were in the grade school about the time that the 1929 crash happened. Do you remember any of that?
exactly. My mother died there in Rehoboth, New Mexico, which is near Gallup, as a result of childbirth. My sister was born on May 22, and my mother died on June 19. They didn't have really sophisticated care, so my father sent my newborn sister and I up to Grand Rapids on a train. And this lady that took us up there had been on the mission field also, but it was her. She was, I think she'd ended her term. And so my dad loaded her up with us 2 kids, and she took us all the way up to Michigan on that train. And that was in 1929, June of 1929. Back to Grand Rapids. I lived with my grandparents then.
So tell us what you really remember about the early 1930s.
Well, I remember when I first got to Grand Rapids, they actually still had some streetcar tracks. And the garbage wagons, they had them drawn by these huge draft horses. We had milkmen came around with horse pulled milk wagons. Iceman got a little more sophisticated. They had trucks, and I can recall the biggest treat for us was to wait till the Iceman got in the house, and then we'd lift the canvas on the truck and get a piece of ice. They had hucksters that also had horse-drawn wagons, and they'd holler out their wares, and the housewives would go out and buy stuff. And we had to tighten our belts a little bit, but we didn't know any better. It didn't bother us.
As the Depression began to ease a little bit, I guess there was a election that elected a new president.
Yes.
And do you remember that?
Yes, I do. After I was in Grand Rapids for about 2 years, then my father came back up here, and he had a Model A, and the election, it was the election between Hoover and Roosevelt. And my father had a big picture of Hoover in the window of that Model A, and the story went around in our circles that if Roosevelt got in, we were going to get some beer. And I figured, hey, what's wrong with that? I was thinking of root beer, I didn't know what the other stuff was, and I couldn't understand why that was a negative.
As Roosevelt was in, he began to implement a series of programs. Did you get involved in any of those?
No, I didn't, but I knew of them. They had the WPA, and that was the acronym for We Putter Around. Then they had the CCC. That was for a lot of city boys, and it was good training for them. They'd put them out in the woods up north, and they'd build bridges and that sort of thing. And then there were some military programs. I don't know whether that was innovation by President Roosevelt or not. CTD, Civilian Training Corps, they called it, and they had that down at Camp Custer. I enrolled in that when I was in high school.
Yes, you must have graduated out of the 8th grade and began to go to high school about that time.
Yes.
And can you tell us anything that's interesting about your transition to high school?
Yeah, I first started high school, Ottawa Hills High School, and a little humorous episode. My friend who sat in front of me, I hit him on the head with a pencil, and the teacher came and grabbed us both by the hair. They could do that in those days. He said, "I will not have any roughhouse in my classroom." Well, anyway, that same friend of mine is now living the same facility I am. But we moved away. Then I went to South High School, and that's the former alma mater of President Ford,
Mm-hmm.
But he graduated 10 years before I did. I graduated in 1941 from South High School.
Okay. As you were finishing up your high school then, do you recall what was happening in the world?
Yeah, actually, in October 1940, the 126th Infantry, 32nd Division, was federalized for 1-year training down in Camp Beauregard in Louisiana. So when they moved down there, that left a vacuum as far as state military. So they organized what they call the Michigan State Troops. And as a kid, I joined that with my father. My father was a World War I vet. And we joined the Home Guard, or Michigan State Troops. And I can recall the night of Pearl Harbor. That was a Sunday.
Yes.
I went out on a date, and I got home a little bit late, and I was oblivious to the fact that what had happened, Pearl Harbor. When I got home, the light was on, and my mother was there, and she said, "Where were you?" and that sort of thing. She said, "Your captain wants you out of the airport." That's the old airport on 32nd Street. Dad's over there already. He was a sergeant, buck sergeant, and I was a corporal. So we had to go over there, and we had to guard that old airport. But, we didn't recognize the significance at that time, but it was important.
Yes, it was. It's a significant thing that happened all over the country on that day and that evening. What transpired with your friends and yourself as you discovered that we were in a war?
Well, I was going to junior college at the time, and when we were on duty at that airport, we were on 2 days and off 4 days, and I might say that the faculty at the college just bent over backward, gave us every break they could academically. Then one day, Captain Sampson came around, and he was the Air Force recruiting person, and he came out with something that sounded pretty attractive to me, pilot training. And so I signed up, and then I told my parents about it. And I could do it because I was 18 then. My father, I thought my dad would be pleased because he was a military man himself. He came to this country to take a trip, and he stayed here, and he joined the Army before World War I. That's how he got his citizenship. So I figured my father would be pleased, you know, but he had the opposite reaction. So what's going to happen with your college work? But anyway, I enlisted. This was in November of '42, and I told my mother when the letter came in to report for duty to let the college know right away. And I was sitting in physics class at the time, and the lady from the office came in, and the teacher said, "Well, Romeyn, you got a letter from Washington." So this is the middle of the class. I folded up my books and got up and walked out. I said goodbye to everybody and just walked out. I was so eager.
Okay. At the time that you had enlisted in the Air Force, was that still part of the Army?
Yeah, it was still the Army Air Corps.
Yes. And now during your enlistment and the period right at that particular time, where did you go?
Well, we got on the train here, the old Union Depot, and they took us down to Chicago, and from there to Miami Beach, Florida. This is February. That wasn't too bad. So we were billeted in hotels that the Air Force took over, the Air Corps. I was in the Metropole Hotel in Miami Beach. They had all these nice bathrooms and showers and everything, but we couldn't use them. They were just for show, and we had to use other facilities. But we were there for about 30 days for basic, and then we were transferred. We had to take the prerequisite to pilot training at that time was 2 years of college. Well, during the war, they kind of eased up on that, but you had to take a series of tests, and then they determined how much more college you should have to make up for that time, and then you were assigned to different colleges and universities. And I was sent to Duquesne University in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
And they call that College Training Detachment, CTD.
So you weren't in Florida too long, about a month?
About a month.
Tell us about the basic training that you took and what kind of uniforms and things you wore at that time.
Well, it was kind of a rude awakening. You know, we enlisted with the idea that we'd be aviation cadets.
Sure.
We were privates, buck privates, and that was, we were imbued with that idea. We were not cadets, we were buck privates, and $21 a month. But having had some home guard training as a non-com, I made the fatal mistake of correcting my instructors.
Oops.
And that was quite a put down after that. But later on, it did serve me well, the military training we did have.
Again, what did you wear as far as uniforms were concerned?
The uniforms were regular khakis in Florida. And then when we went to the northern climate, well, then of course we had the regular ODs.
So it was still wintertime when you arrived there?
Yes, in Pittsburgh.
So how did you get from Florida to Pittsburgh?
Troop train.
They didn't fly you?
No, not at that time. No, troop train. I mean, stop and go, and they weren't all that clean in those days.
I was just going to ask you what kind of an engine it was.
They had coal, the steam engines yet, and the mess car, for example, had the doors open, you know, and the smoke. They used stoves in there, and the the passenger cars too, they were not clean. You'd get smoke in from times. I don't know where it seeped in, but
Now, as you arrived in Pennsylvania to really go to college again, what was it like there?
well, it was a mixture of academics. This was a Catholic college, Duquesne University, and we had some civilian instructors, priests, and we had a curriculum of mathematics and English, some science, and different courses, but along with that, of course, the military training part. And I would say this, that Pittsburgh was a wonderful town. They just opened their arms to military personnel. As a matter of fact, I went to the first Presbyterian church in Pittsburgh with a buddy of mine from Chicago, and this was the week before Easter, and a lady came up to us and asked us if we'd like to have Easter dinner with her. And that was kind of a dumb question. I guess we did. So she said, "Well, next week when you come to church, you ask for Mrs. Patterson's pew." There, I guess they would pay some money and they'd have the reserved pew. So we went there, and that was Easter Day, and that's the day that Easter and Christmas are the day that the only days that some people go to church. So the place was crowded. And there was a lot of brass there and everything in the foyer. But we made our way up to the usher and said, "We have to sit in Mrs. Patterson's pew," just like that. They brought us right down, best seat in the whole sanctuary. And she said, now, then we went to her home. Oh, when we got out of the service, she had a driver and a chauffeur.
All right.
And we went to her house, and she had Adam the butler.
Okay.
It was up in Squirrel Hill, I believe it, a very exclusive area in Pittsburgh. And she said, "Now, you boys, if you're, I want you to call me Mother Patterson." So we call her Mom. And every weekend that we got off, she'd either send a vehicle over, pick us up, and we were treated very, very well. She had a sister that had a stable of horses, and those barns were just beautiful, well kept. And when I left there, she said, "I'd like to have a party for you. Invite whoever you want." So I invited my whole flight. It was at the golf course.
Yeah.
And she gave me a King James version of the Bible. I still have it today. And when it was overseas, she corresponded with us. She was a widow, a wealthy widow.
How long were you in Pennsylvania then?
About 5 months.
Okay. And then where did you go from there?
Then we went to what they call a classification center in Nashville, Tennessee. And there you took a series of tests, including a psychiatric evaluation. And it was determined whether or not you were to go into pilot training, bombardier, or navigator. Mm-hmm. Or neither.
Yeah.
None of the three.
Or home, huh?
Or mechanics or something like that.
Sure.
So the majority were funneled into the pilot training program.
And that was you also.
Yeah, right.
And tell us about the training for a pilot at that time.
Well, at that time, after classification center, then we went to Montgomery, Alabama. That was Maxwell Field. Mm-hmm. And there we had what we call pre-flight training. And that's more academics and more military, where we had hazing and all that sort of thing. And with my background experience, I was made a cadet officer, and that had certain privileges. We had to wear Sam Brown belts and sabers and that sort of thing. And we knew when they'd have these drum out ceremonies, that's when a cadet was caught lying, cheating, or stealing.
Tell us about one of those.
In the middle of the night, they usually drum us out, and so as cadet officers, we knew that. and the other men would see the light in our under the door in our room. So one night we had a drum out, and we went down the line there, and we pulled the blankets off some of these guys, and some of them were laying there with the uniforms on. But then you'd fall in formation, you'd be marched down to the parade grounds, and then the adjutant, the wing adjutant, would make the announcement that a certain cadet was caught cheating on a test such and such a day, and he was ordered to come forward. They stripped him of his brass, and then the announcement came that we were no longer to mention the name of him. And this poor fellow would have to march off the field, and that was the end of his pilot training career.
Yeah. Did quite a few of those happen? While you were
Not
there
too
in school?
many. Not too many. We were pretty well imbued on what was expected of us in the honor code. As a matter of fact, here again, I've told this story, and I think it's true, but they'd ask, how many of you cadets did not put polish on your shoes before this formation? You raise your hand, and you'd get gigged.
Yeah.
You'd get punished.
But if you didn't raise your hand and they knew elsewise,
Yeah,
like,
and if another cadet knew you were lying and didn't blow the whistle, he too was in violation of the honor code.
so as you took your training there, where did you go next?
The next phase was basic flight training, and the aircraft that we had were Stearmans. The two wing jobs, open cockpit, and they still use them, I guess, in some air shows. And we learned to fly in those Stearmans. And what would happen, I guess, after about 8 hours, you'd take a flight with an instructor, and then land, and he says, "Hey, I don't want to fly with you anymore. Take off." So we took off, and you're supposed to come right in. I was having so much fun. I landed, and I took off again and went around the second time. But little humor involved. We had a teacher or an instructor who was a civilian, and his name was Michael Patrick Ryan Efferson, BBB, from Texas. I said, "Sir, what's that BBB for?" He said, "Bull Baffles Brains." He was quite a character. He had the old scarf, and I guess he was a barnstormer before the war. And we had to put our shoulder straps on, when we got on our seats. Well, one day one of my associates was flying with Michael Patrick Ryan Efferson, and they were doing some maneuvers, and they got an inverted flight. And then when you right yourself up, then the cadet usually looks in that rear view mirror. The instructor's back there, and you usually see his mouth going like that. There's nobody back there. He looked down, and here was Michael Patrick floating down in a parachute. He fell out. He forgot to put his shoulder harness on.
Okay.
Yeah.
As you trained in these planes, when did you begin to get into looking at or flying the multi-engine planes?
Well, that was down the road a way. The next phase of training was what they call basic flight training, and that was a BT-13, and that was in Shaw Field, Sumter, South Carolina.
Okay.
And that aircraft was equipped with radio. The PT-13 wasn't, of course. So you got into radio work, and that aircraft, they called it the Vol-T vibrator, because it really would.
Yeah.
And I had an instructor that was pretty profane. So we had to write a biographical sketch on ourselves, and I wrote in mine that regardless of how much you think you have to yell at me, I would appreciate it if you wouldn't use profanity. Believe it or not, he used more profanity on me than any of the other cadets. I mean, just to exercise his power and control. I can recall one episode though. We were he gave me a forced landing procedure, and that's when the instructor pulls the throttle back, and you've got to pick out a field and maneuver your aircraft so you're heading into the wind, and you don't get a second chance, you know. And so we were coming in on a final approach, and then the motor kicked in again. The instructor must have kicked it in. We were just climbing up, and all of a sudden the aircraft went off. The motor went off again, or not? I mean, it was a dead motor. And I figured this guy is using poor judgment. We're heading for trees. So I went through the regular procedure, which is the first thing you do is you change your gas tank, and then full rich mixture and props full forward. And just as I changed the gas tank, the engine kicked in again. And we pulled up and went around. I looked at that rearview mirror, and this instructor was pretty white in the face. He said, "Drive me back to the base." So we landed, and he proceeded to question me what happened. And I told him what happened. And I said, "Sir, you used poor judgment, I figured, giving me a forced landing after in that condition." He said, "I didn't touch anything." And we figured that what had happened, that when we changed the gas tank, that's what kicked in. There was some blockage in the gas line.
Oh my!
But anyway, I would say that after that time, he kind of minimized his profanity. He got little control over himself.
So tell us the next stage of your training.
Okay, the next phase was advanced flying training. That was in Moody Field, Valdosta, Georgia, and that was the AT-10s. They were twin engine trainers, and that was a pretty nice aircraft. I liked that aircraft.
Anything special happen at that particular time?
Yeah, I'm not a suspicious person, but one day we were going to fly, and this other cadet and I flipped to see who was going up with the instructor first, and this was plane 213, and the other cadet won the flip, and they took off, and that aircraft augured in. What had happened, we don't know what happened, but when they came in, they hit a tree, and the cadet was on the left side, and that tree was between the nacelle and the left engine, and the cadet was killed, but the pilot, the instructor survived. It was on plane 213.
That would make you sit up and think a little bit, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's providential.
As you continued on your training, when did you get your wings and graduate?
Okay, we graduated from there on May 22, 1944. That was class 44E, they call that. And that was the only time that we got home in 3 years, or that I was given leave. So I came home as a brand new second lieutenant, uniform, and a fresh pilot hat and all that sort of thing, and had a lot of fun back here in Grand Rapids, Michigan for about 2 weeks. And then I went back, and my assignment wasn't to fly aircraft. It was to be a tactical officer for cadets, this training program. And so I tried to get that stuff over with and spend some time in the swimming pool, the officers club, until the commandant of cadets got on me. And I said I went into all this pilot training not to do this sort of thing. And I was transferred from there then to St. Joe, Missouri, what they call a transition school, where I went to transition into C-47s. And we were there for about a month, and then sent down to Miami Beach again for a couple of days, and then sent overseas, or flew overseas.
So you flew overseas, so it didn't take very long to get there, did it?
Yeah, no, it didn't. We landed in Casablanca. We didn't know where we were going until after we were airborne.
And as you arrived in Casablanca, what did you discover?
Well, it was a whole new world. A whole new culture, and you know, you read about it in books, but then you see it. The culture was entirely different. We were billeted at the airport, had fairly good quarters, 2 officers in a cubicle, cement block.
Did you spend much time there?
Yeah, I was in Casablanca probably for about 6 months, and we would fly from there. This was right at the time I got there was the time the invasion of southern France occurred.
Okay.
And I wasn't really active in that, I don't recall. My flights were mostly to Naples and Rome, Italy.
Okay. And you flew there and discharged your cargo and flew right back to Casablanca?
Generally, yeah. And we would fly just about anything from human beings to mattresses. I know one time I took a load of mattresses. Another time I had a whole platoon of wax. And then one time I had a whole USO people, actors and stuff. They were putting on programs, you know, for morale raising purposes. And so we and then one time we landed and dipped a wing over in Benghazi, Libya, right across the bay from Tripoli. And while I was there, while they were doing that, I got to the military dump, and I found a pretty nice British motorcycle from Montgomery's Africa. You know, Montgomery's 8th Army. They had a lot of motorcycles, and I maneuvered to get that motorcycle loaded onto my aircraft. Had a little problem with the traffic officer, and he wanted to remove it. I said, "Well, my plane was not fixed according to Army regulation. There was something wrong with it. I didn't want to, couldn't take passengers or something like that. But anyway, it worked, and I brought that motorcycle back to Casablanca and had it sandblasted and stenciled and painted OD."
So then you had some transportation to get around the area, didn't you?
Yeah, and it became pretty popular, and it became so popular that the commanding general came out with an order that we were not to ride motorcycles anymore. It wasn't dignified or something, I don't know. So I would go off the French side of the airfield and got away with it for about 3 months until I was caught. That went on my 201 record.
You mentioned the flying some USO people over to Rome. Did you happen to be fortunate enough to see USO shows there in Casablanca?
Yeah, we did, and I recall one time Frank Sinatra was there, and at that time he was a little skinny fellow, you know, and Phil, there was a Phil, another actor, I can't think of his name now, but he kept running Frank Sinatra down on the stage, you know. We didn't think much of him because he was back at home and enjoying life in the United States. But this guy was so demeaning to Sinatra that we felt sorry for the guy. And so after the program, we got to meet him over in the Officers Club, and I had a French young lady with me, and they were just as gaga about Frank Sinatra as our American ladies.
Any other, like Bob Hope? Did you happen to see Bob Hope?
No, I didn't. There were, I think a James Massey came through, but I can't be certain of that.
Some of the fellows that I've interviewed, one of them in particular, he knew Frank Sinatra's father, and so he was quite impressed with Frank and his success. Did you happen to meet any notable people like that while you were in Casablanca?
Not really. I don't recall. At one time I did fly a brigadier general, but I don't even remember his name.
Okay. During that time, if I'm right, Casablanca was a clearing place for German prisoners of war. Did you happen to be around or know about that?
No, we had all Italian prisoners.
Okay.
And as a matter of fact, they did our menial work in our barracks, our BOQs, and one night, these prisoners knew that our flights were to Italy, and one night before takeoff, our flights were planned so that we get into Italy at the break of dawn, for security. They still had blackouts. And what you would do, you'd take a flashlight and you look your aircraft over, and in the back end of the empennage, they call it, of the aircraft, it's the tail end of the aircraft, there's a lot of cable work. But that was behind, I don't know the dignified word, the relief station, I said, the relief room.
Okay.
So that night I opened that door and I put my flashlight there, and there were two eyeballs down there underneath the cables.
Wow.
And it was one of these PWs, knew we were going to his homeland. And I recall that I hollered for him to get out, and then I went out, told my co-pilot to get MPs, and we waited for this guy to come out, and he never came out. So we went back in there. What had happened, I slammed the door on the poor guy. He couldn't get out. But anyway, they brought him out, and it's possible that he could have followed up our takeoff.
Sure.
That far back and then with the control cables. But maybe this guy is still pounding rocks, I don't know, but I can understand he wanted to get back home.
Sure. How long were you in that particular area?
I think it was probably about 6 months. Then I was transferred to Oran, Algeria, and we worked out of there. While I was at Casablanca, then I went to first pilot school in Marrakesh, Morocco. That was south of Casablanca. And then when we moved up to Oran, that's the base I was stationed at when the VE day came along.
Okay. Did you change planes at the time that you went back to this school? Is that the reason?
Yeah. After VE day, then I was sent to first pilot school for C-46s in Cairo, Egypt.
Okay.
And that was not a pleasant experience. It was during the hot weather, and the instructor indoctrinated us about that aircraft, and there was a trap door on the floor of the aircraft. That led into what they call the hellhole. Mm-hmm. You go down in there and you see all your hydraulic lines and that sort of thing, and the instructor said, now if the hydraulic system goes out, then you revert to manual. And if that doesn't work, you chop this line. It didn't sound very sophisticated to me. And besides that, the hot weather and all these things, I just didn't like that aircraft.
Did you fly it for a period of time then?
Yeah, just in training.
Just in training.
Yeah.
Now, this was after VE Day?
That was after VE Day. So when I got home, or back to the base, I was socializing with the colonel, and he asked me how I liked the school. I said, the school's all right, but the aircraft, I don't like that aircraft. But anyway, before this transfer, myself and my associates became reality, it was VJ Day. And so we didn't have to go to China, Burma, India. And so I stayed in Oran after VJ Day, did some flying. And then all along, I had a paternal grandfather that lived in the Netherlands that was occupied by the Germans. And I wrote a letter to the International Red Cross in Geneva, Switzerland, to determine whether or not he was alive. And they said he was alive and well. So after they were liberated, I had to pull some strings, and I got assigned to Brussels, Belgium for 10 days with authorization to go into the Netherlands. So I made my way into that country, and I rode all over that country on the trains. I just flashed my orders. They didn't say anything about free passage, but it worked. And they brought me to this town way over on the German border. The name of the town is Enschede, where my grandfather lived. And got to his house at night, and the man that answered the door, I thought that was my grandfather, but it was my father's oldest brother. See, I never saw these people, of course, and I called him grandfather. And I told him where I was coming from, you know. And he brought me up to the room where my grandfather was in bed. They went to bed early to keep warm. And I told him that I was his son John's boy from America. And my grandfather, in his own language, he said I had never anticipated this. I had a tear in his eye. And I spent 4 days with him. We'd walk down the streets, and he'd point out where we bombed the daylights out of their factories, because the Germans used their factories.
Sure.
And it was a pleasant experience. But I was gone 26 days.
What was their opinion of the Germans and the liberation and so on?
They had no use for the Germans. Former neighbors had come over after the war, across the border, and steal their sewing machines and their bicycles, and they were just mean, very mean.
Very mean.
The Hollanders mostly appreciated Montgomery because the British forces liberated the northern part of that country. American forces down below, down around Aachen. There's a province that hangs down there called Limburg. It's something like a peninsula, and Aachen was the first German town that our American forces took. But they highly regarded the British.
Then from there, where did you go? Did you go back to where you were stationed before?
Yeah, then I went back to to either Oran or Casablanca, and then the plans were that I was to fly a war-weary plane, you know, and we had it all planned to go down to Central Africa to Dakar, and then across to Natal, Brazil, and then fly up the coastline. Had a nice plan, but for punishment for being gone 26 days and only authorized 10, they sent me back on board a ship. And it was during the winter time, and we were on that ship New Year's and Christmas Eve both.
Okay.
And you know, landlubbers, when they get on a ship, they always say that they've experienced the worst storm ever.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it was just a regular storm, but we thought it was the worst one. I know a lot of our people were sick.
Yeah. Did you happen to enjoy being seasick?
No, it didn't bother me because we had good quarters. We were near the center of the ship, and some of the other personnel were in the rear end of the ship. So when that rear end had come out of the water and shake, they got back and forth and up and down, and there were a lot of sick people.
Yeah. What year was that? As you
That was
come back to the States?
that was in December of 45.
45. As you arrived back in the States on the ship, where did you go then?
We came in at Newport News, and then we went through a series of things for separation, and then I took the bus back to Grand Rapids, Michigan.
And were you discharged then?
Yeah, I still had, I was still considered on active duty till February, as I recall, of 46.
Of 46.
Yeah.
As you were discharged and so on, what did you do then?
Well, I stayed in the Air Force Reserve. We had aircraft here at the old airport on 32nd Street. We had AT-6, and we could fly weekends. It was a nice aircraft to fly, and pretty much on our own. So I'd fly up to my stepmother's people up around McBain, Michigan, Cadillac area, and hang a buzz job on the farmers. They didn't like that, you know, the cattle would go bananas. But anyway, then they transferred that reserve unit to Selfridge Field, and I stayed in the Air Reserve for about a year, but it was pretty inconvenient going way over to Selfridge Field. So then I got out of the Air Reserve, but somebody talked me into joining the National Guard, infantry, which I did. And I know the colonel, he was the regimental exec officer, he said, yeah, we can move you in as a master sergeant. I said, oh, I don't want to, I can't handle that. A master sergeant have to know something. They really do.
Yeah.
So anyway, we negotiated, and I made a lateral transfer, First Lieutenant Air Corps, it was Air Force at that time, to First Lieutenant Infantry. But I had to go down to Fort Benning for some training to retire that reservation, or whatever they called it, the requirement. Mm-hmm. And so then I stayed in the National Guard and was there for a number of years.
Did you do a civilian job at that time as well, or
no? I went back
full time in the National Guard?
Yeah, no, I went back to college, and then I went into business, a little business down in Benton Harbor, Michigan, selling prefab houses and log cabins. Another veteran, and I went into that business. And then,
how long did you stay in Benton Harbor then?
Probably about 2 years. And then I got another job with a law office as an investigator, and then I started working for an insurance company, and I stayed with that insurance company as a claims manager for this area for a number of years, and then subsequently went into business for myself with another person, same type of business, but working for different insurance companies.
So it seems like you had quite a varied life after you came home from the war and went through college again.
Right.
What do you feel that this experience in your young life did for you? Did you think it improved your outlook on the world, or?
Oh, certainly. It certainly broadened your vision. When you live in one city all your life and in a kind of a sheltered, closed society, you don't have that broad view, and when you get out into the world and those experiences in other cultures, it was definitely an education for the good.
Did you continue to fly your whole life, or did, after you came back from the service and was done in that area, did you continue to fly planes?
No, I didn't. After I got out of the Air Force Reserve program in Selfridge Field, I didn't do any more flying because I would have had to pay for it then.
Okay.
We had good air, and then again it would be kind of a come down with a nice, powerful AT-6 flying Stenson or whatever. So I never went back into flying.
Okay. Where did you meet your wife during all that period of time?
Well, I got married pretty late in life, but I married my wife in what we call the Christian Singles Club. And we got married, and we had 2 daughters.
Okay.
One daughter joined the Marine Corps, believe it or not, and she kept telling me, Dad, you did the same thing. She was 18, and we had her programmed for pre-dent curriculum in Kelvin College, but some Marine Corps recruiter was cruising the hallways in the South Christian High School, and she made the mistake of asking if they had room in the Marine Corps for musicians. That's all he needed. She was a musician. But he failed to tell her that first you have to be a Marine, and then a musician, in that order. So she went down to Paris Island, and it was that year that a general was implementing his pipe dream, and they called the program the Crucible. And if I got the numbers right, they had to be able to move, I think it was 58 miles in 48 hours. It's almost unbelievable, and not by truck. And the Marine Corps, you don't leave anybody behind. So if one of their associates was lagging, you had to pull them along. And they had segregation in the Marine Corps for the women and the men.
Yes.
But they made no allowances for the physical differences between men and women. The women still had to march at a 30-inch step just like the men, and they weren't built for it. That's my opinion. It caused my daughter problems.
How long did she stay in the Marine Corps?
She stayed in there until she was transferred to San Diego at the Marine Depot there, Marine Recruit Depot, and she was in the band there, and almost her full 3 years, but her legs gave out, and so she got a medical discharge.
Well, Gelmer, you had quite a varied life. I appreciate the time that you've spent talking with me, and we'll see that you get copies of this interview. So
Okay.
I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, but I have a little feeling that I've talked a little bit too much about myself.
Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. That's